Okay, so let's just jump into it. What I wanted to talk to you about today, Kai, was masculinity. And obviously, we can go in many different directions with this topic. But I wanted to start off with, like I said earlier, some of the things that came out of a conversation that you and I had a couple weeks ago.
Yeah,
And I found it to be a valuable perspective, and I wanted to get into it more. So I thought maybe we could do this for posterity.
sure.
Awesome. I'm just going to ask you point blank. I mean, when we were chatting, you made mention of being raised in a way that made you feel like being a man was bad or wrong. Is that kind of correct in the gist of it?
Yeah, that's obviously an oversimplification, but there were undertones of that message in my upbringing for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so why don't we just start there? I mean, what were your sort of male influences as a young person growing up, and how did you kind of start getting this message that maybe being masculine or a man was somehow taboo?
Not so much taboo, but I guess masculinity is somehow inherently flawed,
Mhm.
and or too aggressive, and or to something this or something that, and based on the evidence on display, that is absolutely true. Um, but it does not mean every single man is subject to those ailments. That some men have different choices to make and different levels of self-awareness they can accomplish, and there's nothing wrong in our inherent masculinity. That desire to protect, to hold good space, to be patient, to be kind. Like these are all to me very high quality masculine traits.
Yeah, and so that's one of the questions I wanted to bring up with you is this idea of inherent masculine and feminine traits, because that's something that I've
Mhm.
been pondering and toying around with a lot, in the last few years, just trying to wrap my head around it. And sometimes it seems to me that there are just qualities, and then
Mhm.
because of patterns, like more men behave this way, so we see this kind of pattern, and we automatically ascribe the quality to masculinity. So, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think there's an inherent masculine archetype, and if so, what is it in your opinion?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting. Like the first thing I think of is, of course, it's a spectrum. There's not just like man, woman, black, white. Obviously, I was married to a woman for 25 years who had a lot of inherent masculine qualities, and she made them work wonderfully well for her. So obviously, these qualities are not specific to gender, but there tends to be generalizations, for lack of a better way of putting it. And what was the question again?
Yeah,
Specifics.
no, you did answer it. I mean, yeah. So
Yeah.
you think that it's again, there's trends, and so we just generalize and we say this is a masculine trait, this is a feminine trait. But if
Mhm.
you were to produce sort of a list of what you consider to be inherently male or masculine qualities, what are some of the things that would pop up for you?
Yeah, okay. The first thing that's coming to mind more specifically is just the power to observe without reacting. And it is a power, like to just detach and just to be able to observe, obsess, kind of receive data and process it and make decent conditional decisions. Like in a crisis, and I used to work in the woods, and sometimes you get that crisis moment and you just need action, decisive, clear, concise, definitive action. And not to say that that is inherently male quality, but I've noticed that men seem to hold that a little differently. Women obviously tend to be like they're more biologically attached. They menstruate every month. Obviously, they can give birth. We can't. That creates a whole different level of conditioning. And when I say conditioning, it's nothing bad or wrong or like there's nothing wrong. It's just we're trying to become more self-aware of how we're wired. And so, obviously, as a man, I know that intimately well. And I've also seen how easily it can get distorted. And I'm thinking of things like pornography or violence or power or kind of like unmitigated rage. We obviously go to war, we're willing to kill one another with guns. Like it's pretty twisted and sick when you think about it on a sort of philosophical level. And so, where do those instincts come into play? And the responsibility we all have as kind of more self aware men is that, yeah, I recognize those traits are within me and I don't give them attention. I don't allow them to hold sway. It's kind of like that spiritual legend, which wolf do you feed, the light or the dark wolf?
Right.
Right. So we have a responsibility as men to kind of walk a clean line and be very self-aware and it reminds me of some of the AA friends I have. Like to them, it's a daily choice: do I drink or do I not drink? That's very black and white.
Hmm.
As for most of us, it's a bit nuanced. Like we can be in a healthy marriage, and then we start getting bored, and we stop paying enough attention, and then some cute girl walks by, and we get aroused, and off we go, and like a dark tangent, instead of taking responsibility for the fact that your relationship needs to be reinvigorated, right? Stuff like that.
Right.
And having lived with an alcoholic father and sort of learned some hard lessons myself, like I have made mistakes where I definitely chose poorly in terms of life decisions, and to also to allow yourself the forgiveness and compassion to grow and understand that we all kind of live in community, and as we age, ideally become more and more responsible to that kind of presentation of self.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very well said. Yeah. And so, I mean, based on what you're saying, I'm getting kind of the impression that your view of what a man, not to say what a man should be, but sort of the some of the masculine traits that we see today are not ones that you yourself wish to embody, the aggression, the
Exactly.
greed, and all that kind of stuff. So,
Exactly. The selfishness, I think,
mhm.
is what it comes down to. Like just that willingness to be selfish, to lie, to cheat, to steal, to like just serve yourself and your own ends. Um, so that's where, like, when I think we had our conversation, you were talking about discovering more of the feminine within self. Absolutely. And so that balance within, women can discover more of their masculine nature and use it in balance as well to navigate life, to actually not get lost in kind of whimsy, or like make a decision once in a while. I'm talking to my girlfriend right now.
Hopefully she doesn't see this.
No, I don't care if she does. We'll have a
No,
laugh.
I know. Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's, that's
And kind of
funny.
how you, sorry to interrupt you, and also
No,
how
no,
you
you go
present in
ahead.
your marriage, right? Like I look at you as a man who I admire. Like you present in your marriage, you are there, you're a father for your kids. That's a responsibility you don't shirk. It's a priority, obviously, and so that to me is also a really high quality male characteristic. So,
Responsibility.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And you
Yeah.
see a lot of, you see a lot of what I would call like man children who
Oh gosh.
lack
Yeah.
that, right? I mean, entirely,
Mhm.
they take no ownership, no responsibility of things. And
Yeah, and
so,
and
yeah.
to be fair, I was a man child too for
Oh,
many years.
hey,
So,
I mean, yeah, you're talking to a probably a
oh
current
yeah.
man child, let's be honest, but I feel like I'm
Mhm.
better at taking responsibility for a lot of things now. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There comes points where you can sort of take the teeter totter to the better other side, so to speak. Yeah.
Mhm. So, what do you think is causing "quote unquote" toxic masculinity or even toxic femininity? Because you did mention that during our conversation last time around, and so what do you think that is a symptom of?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I'm dating a counselor right now, and in our conversations, she talks a lot about family of origin stuff that most people suffer from. Like, for example, my father was alcoholic from a fairly young age, and my mom was very emotionally distant. She was always there for me in many ways. Like, I had a safe roof, I had food, but there was no cuddling or hugging or like safe, like that kind of nurture. She the way because of the way she was raised, so family of origin, family of origin, family of origin,
Yeah.
there wasn't a lot of that for me specifically. And then my dad kind of got lost in alcoholism, and he kind of like the French refer to that alcohol thing as opening you to bad spirits, like the spirit word. So he had a lot of weird kind of, I don't know, like just out of balance energy. I don't know how else to describe it.
Hmm.
And that represented in kind of misogynistic points of view and a lot of anger and resentments and pettinesses. And, so that was part of how I learned to manage life as well, was representing that way. And so also family of origin, he learned that from his mom, and I learned that from his grandmother, who on and on it goes. So the family of origin wounding, and like for women is typically trauma, and usually physical and or sexual trauma, 1/3 of women. And that is a very destabilizing thing. And the coping mechanisms can be like, desire to be controlling, blah, 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 blah. And I'm overgeneralizing here again, of course.
Of course.
We're complex beings. And then as a man too, like if you feel disempowered or if you're abused or, belittled, you tend to resort to anger because that gives you control.
Hmm.
You can resist this kind of negativity. And so for me, and again generalizing, a lot of the women in my life growing up would try to emasculate me, like, why would you do that, Kai? Or why aren't you good enough? Or how come you're not doing well enough? Or like all of this kind of constant negative messaging. And then I was, as a teenager, younger man, modern feminism, and it's not a critique of modern feminism, it was totally necessary. But one of the messages that I got was that somehow men were inherently inferior, right? And so of course I believed it for a while, and to the great credit of one of my older women friends, she just laughed at me one day and said, Kai, I can't believe how brainwashed you've become. That's a load of bullshit. You know? And over the preceding years, she would give me these little messages. Like, I lived on an island and the ferry would get knocked out, and there'd be no food for a couple of days, so a fisherman would go and catch fish and put fish on the dock for free. And she'd be like, fuck, I admire men like him, just take charge and get shit done and provide for community. Like, no debating, no forming a committee. Just, it's like, okay, I get your point. So there's that ability to provide, to have abundance and share abundance, and then make decisions. And these are all kind of lessons that I've grown to appreciate over time.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, trying to demonize one gender or the other doesn't really bring us anywhere. Saying that men are inferior is not going to help them get better. And I think, like you said at the very beginning, a lot of the things that men are doing these days aren't good. It doesn't look good on us, doesn't reflect well on us. But again, how you address that and how you deal with it is going to either lead to improvements or regression, right? Which I think we're seeing a lot of regression in many ways.
Yeah, we're sort of seeing a tension and a splitting. I'm thinking of Georgia right now. You just literally had a white Republican Party sign a law saying less Black people can vote in our state. And this isn't racist. And anybody who says it's racist is just an inflammatory idiot. Actually, no, you're racist.
Yeah.
Sorry, period. Exposed. Like, sometimes you got to call it out too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then at the same time, like, I'm very heavily involved in blockchain technology. Not that that has a lot to do with masculinity specifically, but it's interesting because most of the programming minds in that space, like, it is a space inundated by men, but it's an altruistic numerical system they're creating. Like, the head of Ethereum, he wants to free humans from the sort of oligarchical, hierarchical monetary controls and all of this stuff. So like, that out of balance masculinity is in society itself, and like, I guess what people would call, there's that magic word, I'm forgetting it for some reason, can't believe it. Just the hierarchy of men running society.
Patriarchy.
There we go.
That's the one. Yeah. Well, and I mean, yeah, it's obviously we've had a good run, boys. We've been running the civilized world for 10,000 years, and we've made a real fucking mess of it. Absolutely. And and again, it's not because men are inherently bad, but it's because the types of men who are in power are.
I guess it's an interesting point, because the power structure itself begets very corrupted men. And it's time to get past that. And that's, again, what I love about blockchain technology and the concept of decentralization generally. Yeah. Is that it takes that disadvantage out of the system, and then just becomes about ability and kind of transparency at some point.
Yeah. The whole political system and how it's gamed or rigged is like, it attracts a certain type of man. Well, and I'm sure women too, but absolutely. It kind of reminds me of that Russell Crowe movie Gladiator, where the emperor's trying to give him, make him the heir, and he keeps saying, I don't want it. And Marcus Aurelius says, that's exactly why it should be you, because you don't want it. And it's the opposite. We've got all these people in power who are desperate, craving, chasing it, selling themselves out for it, have no, moral compass of their own. And so, I think it's when you have that type of representation, it does make men look bad.
Absolutely.
But then, like you said, there's other role models out there, or other people who are trying to do the opposite, like this gentleman who I'm not sure what his name is, but the creator, I guess, of Ethereum. Is that who you're referring to?
Yeah, and that's blockchain. I also have a great friend who shall remain nameless. He runs a mental health component in a small town, and he's a rock star, man. He just holds it together for his community day in and day out, and pulls like 40, 50-hour weeks, and does nothing but make sure that people struggling in his community to break addiction patterns and other things have resources. And he's fucking epic. I don't know how to, every time I meet with him, he's such a humble guy, and I just look up at him, and I'm just like, you're amazing. The amount of good and the amount of difference you're making in the world is amazing. And you show up every weekend for your kids, and you're still telling jokes, and everything's fine. And amazing, amazing man. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, they're out there. We exist, I guess. And
Exactly.
I mean, it might be presumptuous to count myself among them, but I feel like, yeah, again, mainly because I don't even really think of myself as a man anymore. It's not really part of my identity in terms of like, something that I'm proud of or something that I'm ashamed of. It's like it's a non sequitur. It's like it's a circumstance. I was born with a dick, and quite lucky in the way the world is. But it also, like you said before, we have a responsibility, knowing that we have all this privilege and all this sort of like built-in advantage in society. We have a responsibility to try and right that and correct that and make it more balanced and fair.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, I guess we never really answered the question, but toxic masculinity, toxic femininity, to me, these sound like extremes, or, we talk about
there's
family
a lot of
origin,
nuance
but
to them.
yeah. But it seems like what we call toxic masculinity today was basically just regular masculinity 30, 40 years ago. Don't you think?
Well, absolutely. Yeah, it was a pretty toxic environment in the world generally. And we are evolving, and civilization is slowly improving, and there is less physical violence. And, if you look at the stats, violent crime per capita is down. You can, twist facts in a lot of different ways, but one would think.
Yeah.
These things are relevant. And like I've been to countries like South Africa where what we take for granted in Canada is quite amazing. Like in South Africa, you didn't go out after dark, period, for a walk, especially, and even during the day, you know exactly where you're going. It was not a safe society. There was violence. There were men with guns. And then when we came back to Canada, we went out for a walk, and we walked until like 10 at night in the streets of Vancouver, totally safe and fine. And so yeah, it's more just I guess perception and access. And and in Canada, like when I look at my niece, for example, like she's a self-empowered 22-year-old. There's no patriarchy repressing her. That there really isn't. She's super smart. She recognizes men who are full of shit, and she chooses to hang around with men who aren't.
Good for her.
Yeah, exactly. Just sees right through a lot of the old crap, and she's really good at her jobs, and her gender never limits her. She gets promoted usually to the top almost immediately because she's really good at what she does. And
That's interesting. Yeah, Cressa said the same thing to me in a conversation. Like she said, like she never felt like her gender ever held her back, or that people looked at her differently in the workplace or anything. She had no experience of that. So I think you're right. It is very much subjective and dependent on a case by case basis, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. And obviously there are still men out there who still want to pretend certain things, both about gender and race, coincidentally. And I'm thinking of our poor neighbors to the south who clearly have a racism, white supremacy underbelly problem in that country that is much more severe than one would have hoped. And it's kind of the same energy, to speak a bit more arbitrarily, I guess, is that like this sense of betterness than other through any filter or misconception or self-delusion, I guess would be the right word. We are all essentially born equal, and just to have an inner acknowledgement of that is actually kind of there's a beauty in just the feeling of that. There's an empowerment to me in acknowledging our kind of equality of being. And I'm just curious. Younger generations seem to have, once again, like when I think of my parents and all the crap they went through, and their parents who lived through a world war, and myself who received a very cheap education, and then millennials today who are entering the world completely bankrupt. Have to pay for college to $50,000, and they're, there's a lot of transition happening right now, and it's a bit of a segue again, but back to like sort of the financial markets, the pandemic, all of these things are accelerating change. And it's going to be an interesting couple of decades going forward for not only masculinity but for humanity, and that tension for humanity right now, and the opportunity for masculinity to sort of be more self-regulating. Like actually speaking up when we hear men say stupid, shitty things, taking responsibility for it. just being more present, and as we do and as we can, and to me that is the cusp of change itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said something interesting there, like for all of humankind, right? And it's like, to me, if you're a man or a woman, like really strongly identify as only one thing, you're kind of like a fracture or a fragment or a fraction of a human being. You know what I mean? Because there's a feminine and a masculine in everybody. And if you're completely repressing one half of that in favor of the other, to me, that's kind of what leads to the toxic behavior. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Because it's like an
absolutely.
extreme. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of the example I'm thinking of is all those sort of hyper anti-gay Republican politicians. Coincidentally, you're like, being gay is so bad, being gay is so bad, and then headline: the Republican politician busted with youth prostitute, like he was the same gender.
Yeah.
Like, oh, they're okay.
Thou dost protest too much, I think.
Exactly.
But that's exactly what you're
much.
saying. Yeah, absolutely. It's a repression of something within them that they are afraid of or that they hate. Well, they hate it because they're afraid of it and they don't understand it. And so what's the best way to really repress that is to externally go after these people, try to, make laws that, discriminate against them, or just be it, like you said, a very vocal homophobe, right? And yeah, so to me, it's like my personal remedy for toxic masculinity, or a way to kind of course correct, was to get to know and embrace my feminine side. And I think just saying that to some guys, like maybe some of them are watching right now, probably cringe. They probably got some comments, they probably make fun of me for saying that, but that's the only way you can be a complete balanced human being, is to at least acknowledge and try to integrate both halves into yourself, in my experience.
Yeah, that's a great segue, because most men try to avoid feelings. Feelings dangerous. Feelings weak, as opposed to like, wow, feelings richness. Wow, experience. Wow, diversity in life. I'm feeling, love, compassion. I'm feeling anger. Frustration. Like just actually allowing feeling to happen. And it was funny because I was counseling one friend of mine. She was like, I want to feel more, but I'm just angry all the time. I'm like, well, if you want to feel more, it's not just going to be the good feelings, it's going to be the not so good feelings too. And then that's the richness, is navigating that larger dichotomy of awareness. Like, okay, I can get pretty fucking furious. How do I deal with that? I go for a walk. I call a friend. And then when I'm noticing I'm going for a walk and I'm breathing fresh air, I usually start feeling relaxed. Then I start appreciating nature, and then that feels good. And just sort of exploring feelings and emotionality, and trusting feelings and emotionality. This really feels toxic to me. Every time I do it, it feels toxic to me. Maybe I should stop doing it. Trusting feelings, navigating within feelings. It's also too, it's a great way to read people. How do I feel around people? I feel really upset, or I feel really insecure. So you can kind of, because we're all quite empathic, I think, if we allow ourselves to be, as we co-regulate, is one of the terms my girlfriend's taught me about. You put two humans in a room and they're both, having a certain emotional state, and typically they will co-regulate. And my own interpretation of this too is like, if you have one who is very self-aware and doesn't allow themselves to become stressed or anxiety ridden just because they're hanging out with somebody who's stressed or anxiety ridden, that person then gets to see a clear representation of someone who's grounded and not sort of going to fall out of their own wellness, and they can actually try to migrate or even subconsciously kind of move towards them.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it?
I
think, the idea that men are, rational thinkers and that women are more emotional is, obviously it's a silly idea, because it, it's the type of emotion that we tend to gravitate toward. I feel that really is determinant. Like as a man.
Yeah, and that's interesting of framing it. I like that.
Yeah, like as a man, or as a boy and as a man, like I felt a lot of anger. That's a feeling. And I felt it, but I think what happens is my anger was always a response to fear. And so I think maybe what happens is, women respond to fear, generally speaking, again, differently, with different emotions or different coping mechanisms. Whereas for men, I think maybe because of our sort of cultural ideas about men and masculinity, it's like anger is the way that we cope with fear. I'm insecure, I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed. anger is the way to
Punch
deal with
something.
that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think you're onto something.
Right. And so
That makes a lot of sense the way you framed it. Yeah. Makes a
yeah,
lot
I
of
don't
sense.
know. It just seems like
It does.
because we all
Mhm.
feel, I mean, men,
Yep.
and so what happens is when we talk about women being feelers, it's like, well, they're more willing to feel sad and to cry. Whereas
Yeah.
when we get into similar situations, instead of getting sad, we get angry and we take charge and we're
Mhm.
aggressive about it. But really, we still feel, we're not just dead emotionally.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're bringing a term to mind, emotional intelligence. And
Mhm.
this is how I was one of the initial frames that women are more emotionally intelligent. And the evidence I've seen is that is true.
Yeah.
um, for a variety of reasons, and kudos. And at the same time, like then I realized, okay, well, as a man, I can be emotionally intelligent too. Like, because we're no less emotional, as you say, we just have different coping emotional mechanisms and et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, your reference to like I feel fear, I feel embarrassed. Like yeah, I've reacted by pushing somebody or doing something stupid to try to distract myself from these uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's like what do we
um,
consider acceptable feelings as men? I think that's what
yes,
really defines it. There are certain feelings that we're told are shameful because they're womanly or they're feminine. And so it's like if I ever feel that way, then that my God, that means I'm kind of feminine, which is shameful because I've been conditioned, in so many different ways to view women as lesser. Like what do you call a guy when
yeah,
he's
that's
acting a
weird
certain
though,
way,
because for
right?
me, you just helped me realize something though. Like in my life, me acting like more feminine was kind of okay in my family and in my
Yep.
youngest years. Where it became more critical was when I got into high school and that sort of
Hmm.
gender stereotype.
Yeah.
What was more criticized in me by my family were my masculine qualities.
Yeah, that's what you said.
Mhm.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and so, how did that affect you? I mean, did that make you become more masculine as like a rebellious thing, or did you kind of learn to suppress that side of yourself?
Yeah, well, I was a very introverted, shy kid, so it would be different probably for everybody. So, yeah, the personal representation of that would be, yeah, I had self-doubt, a lot of self-doubt around. I undervalued myself in
Mm,
the end. I didn't realize the things I could create and the things I was excellent at actually had a lot of value. I would underrepresent them. I'd always assume I, was not capable of achieving really great things, and that somehow I lacked a certain quality to be excellent. And once I let that go, that was a good, huge relief. So yeah,
nice. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you were able to let it go because, yeah, obviously you have a lot to offer and you're very thoughtful and wise person. So,
yeah, and just how many of us get that programming, right? It's sort of
mhm.
almost endemic that we all have this kind of devaluation belief somehow. I don't know how to explain it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and if you don't, I mean, like, if I feel like the people who don't are usually like maybe not all of them, but a lot of the times people who become super famous and stuff, they're quite narcissistic. Like you almost have to be to believe in yourself so wholeheartedly and so like in such a driven way. You know what I mean? To think like
Yeah.
I'm going to play in the Super Bowl or I'm going to be in the NBA or like to have that like driving thing. Whereas most of us we feel doubt, we feel insecurity, and
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know where that comes from, but some people just don't have it. They're just like, nope, I'm
Yeah.
doing it.
Yep. Family of origin.
It's like the previous generations were all fucking their kids up the same way.
Exactly. Yeah, and at the same time, like when I like my nieces who are in school and the kids that they're hanging out with. I have two nieces. One is 22, and I'm sure like you have your own perspectives for your children. One of my nieces is 22, the other is 12. And the 22-year-old at her high school, there was transgender, gay, and it wasn't, it was all just people.
Yeah.
And when I went to high school, I'm not a
Hmm.
faggot. They're
So it's
totally
come
different.
a long way, at least
It's come so far,
yeah, in certain
in just a
places.
couple generations, and just as an example, right? And
Yeah,
yeah, and there's always more to do, or
of
there's more
course.
growth happening as we speak. And yeah, it's kind of interesting. I hang out with a lot of 20-year-old men, coincidentally, who are programmers. So they're a unique cachet of society, but they're all just such lovely, sincere guys. Like they
Oh, great.
genuinely are nice people, and it's really, yeah, straightforward, easy to talk to.
Yeah. Well, hopefully
Very
we're trending.
non-archaic, like archetype masculine, like
Yeah.
no alpha dogginess. Just it's all about the brain and how
Right.
how we communicate and getting at
Interesting.
like the truth. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Mhm.
I mean, those, yeah, and those are good qualities. Well, I'm glad to hear that because I don't really talk to a lot of young guys or anything like that, and I don't really have opportunities to. But obviously, what we see sort of in the popular media on the internet is the polarization. We don't see the middle ground. We see the extremes, right? And so we see kind of this pendulum motion of like people who are what I would call regressive. They miss like the Mad Men days where they could slap the secretary in the ass, and then there's these other people who are like hyper like defensive, fixated on like any microaggression and look calling it out right away. And then
Yeah.
like, those are the representations. But like people like us, I feel like we're somewhere in the
Mhm.
middle, where like you
Yep.
don't really see the middle ground. You just see the extreme. So it's hard to know whether we're trending in the right direction in terms of like how young men are these days. For me, I can't
Yeah.
really tell.
A comedian that I like, she describes it this way: there's always a tension. Like, and she talks about comedy, like I create that tension, and you listen to her, your skin crawls just a bit sometimes. But she's getting at a point. She's creating tension, thought, and like we have a tension right now in culture, and always, and sometimes the tension's that way, and sometimes the tension's that way. To me, the biggest tension right now is young men need to understand that pornography is a huge issue. Period. Like, it's really affecting young men's expectations,
Mm.
their brain chemistry, their dopamine reactions, everything is really like screwing them up. And so to me, that's a negative tension. We need to discuss that. Should be a subject in school.
Yeah.
these, these private money-making conglomerates are trying to misuse your sex drive to their own perverted purposes, and you need to be aware of that and make good decisions around that. And so, yeah, that kind of self-awareness is very relevant as well.
Yeah. Well, and you just made me think of something like it's the same in almost all consumer avenues. Like the food companies are trying to take advantage of our innate need to eat and our desire to eat, and they're turning something that's natural, like a sex drive, which is natural and it can be a healthy thing. They're
Mm.
like basically hacking into us, and because they know the way we work, so they're like leveraging that knowledge and they're playing our
Mm.
own like innate drives against us in a way, which I never really thought about.
Yeah, well, to me, that's the cusp of the next wave of intelligence, is recognizing that these people all have vested interests in manipulating our basic biology. So learn about your basic biology, everybody.
Know yourself. Absolutely. That's
Exactly.
not commandment number one in my religion is know thyself. Then you will know the
Yeah.
universe and the gods.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Well, in
that's
my
wild.
spiritual practice, it's pretty important as well.
Yeah, it seems to be, again, I've been, taking stock of all the different traditions and reading about them. And, it seems to be in all of them, right? I mean, if the kingdom of
True.
God
Yeah.
is within you, you better go within and check out what's going on in there because that seems like a
Yeah.
pretty important place.
Absolutely. And it gets to that point too, though. I think it came up in a previous conversation we did as well, where if you're avoiding yourself, you're really not in a very strong place. You really need to, if you're not even comfortable in your own skin, i.e., if you don't know yourself even well enough to just sit with your feelings, and you're constantly seeking that next dopamine hit from some external source, whether it's your cell phone or whatever it may be. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh
you're definitely
man.
not adhering to any kind of scripture, let alone common sense, even.
No, very true. All right. Well, so to wrap this up, I kind of want to ask you if you could like give a message to a young man or young men who are maybe struggling in these days, you know,
Mhm.
as somebody who came up, like, obviously had your own struggles with masculinity as you've described, what would you like to tell them, or what's something that you'd want to share with them?
Interesting. That the one thing that is coming to mind is that what really was helpful to me growing up was my relationship with men of different generations. Like my grandfather, who raised me directly for about 3 or 4 years and was in my life a lot. He had such a noble, grounded, mature presence, and he was almost underspoken. But in hindsight, in that underspokenness, he allowed me to just be myself around him so consistently without any judgment. It was always a safe place to be. And that mentorship, like join a sailing club, do something that exposes you to men of different generations. Potentially, is just one thought or one idea.
Yeah.
Because for me, that was very rich. Like, I think of my uncles, the quality of the family time I had. Obviously, the access to male role models seems to be one of the key issues, and it's not necessarily an answer. I'm just realizing that there is a crisis of that, and I'm trying to remedy that both now as I'm 51-year-old, more mature male, like I try to represent and mentor when I meet young men. And if they say something I think is a bit repugnant and or gross, I will speak to it rather than just allow it to slide. And just try to represent, like, I'm in a monogamous relationship. I, tell the truth. I am respectful. I'm also not a pushover. If you're going to be bullyish, then I'm going to say that's not really appropriate behavior. So we all just kind of interface as best we can. And to me, the real richness for me personally is just that intergenerational kind of fusing of and then to get past just the masculinity of it, I have female mentors in my life as well, like Krista is a great example, and other women friends who are older and who, like, so again, don't just assume it has to be men, like, and just seek connection, people who are willing to be authentic, to not only hear you, but be aware that you are just obliged to hear them as well. And try to find authenticity in your life and the relationships you cultivate.
Yeah. Yeah. Good words of wisdom. Thank you very much, Kai.
It's been a pleasure. And
yeah, always.
How about you? What would you recommend?
Oh God, no, I have no recommendations. Yeah. Oh, I'd have to think. Yeah, no, I think my recommendation, again, based on my own experiences, would be to stop demonizing the feminine. Stop thinking that it's lesser than. Stop being ashamed of your own femininity, man. It's divine. They bring life into this fucking world. They are goddesses. And the fact that you have a piece of that within you, don't repress it. Get to know it and embrace it and bring it out in your life so that you can become a more complete human being. But then, of course, how do you do that? That's the big question. Right?
And when you say the big question, like, just allow yourself the question and just allow it to unfold.
Yeah. Letting go is hard for a lot of people because it's basically letting go of old ideas about what it means to be a man, a real man. And, again, it's no coincidence that when we insult our brothers, we call them bitches, right? Again, like our insults kind of show what we value and what we don't value and how we think of people. Like, it's an insult to call you a female dog. It's like, get that out of your head, right? The feminine is equal, it's co-creator. So anyways, but
it is. You've just reminded me too that just to finish, like, what is masculinity? I have like a transgender friend, I have 2 gay friends, I have 2 or 3 bisexual friends. It's interesting that I've come to appreciate the fact that I haven't hung out with a lot of stereotypical men in quite a while, and that I have a very rich diversity of very unique, very in touch with their feelings men in my life, and just like to express gratitude for that.
Oh yeah, what a blessing. So I think your advice, I think, about seeking connections with all these different types of people, older generations, and obviously what you've just described, people of different I don't know what you'd call them, gender identities, I guess, right? You're around a lot of different people, you're exposed to them, and so it kind of broadens your mind a little bit, right, as to what it means to be masculine or a man.
Exactly.
Yeah, very cool.